Welcome to the Revenera podcast. I'm Michael Goff, Principal Product Marketing at Revenera, and I'm joined by my colleague Vic DeMarines, VP of Product Management for Software Monetization. Today, we're excited to have with us Chris Bailey, a Principal at Rouse, and Landy Jiang, a partner at Lushung, which is Rouse's network law firm in China. Rouse was established in the UK in 1990 and is recognized as a global intellectual property leader, operating as a closely integrated network with more than 600 people working out of 18 offices in 13 countries. Rouse focuses exclusively on IP, from strategic consulting, technology transactions, patent and trademark registrations, litigation, and enforcement. It has a deep understanding of all jurisdictions around the world and a strong focus on more challenging markets such as Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Russia. Today, our focus is on China. Welcome, Chris and Landy. Can you each give us a quick introduction and tell us a bit about what you do at Rouse and Lushung?
Thanks, Michael. Yes, and Vic. Landy, do you want to go first?
Thank you very much, Chris and Michael. And hi, everyone. Very nice to meet you here. I'm Landy. I'm based in China, Beijing, and I'm doing litigation in the past 17 years with Lusheng and doing a lot of litigations in copyright enforcement, including software cases, trademark, patent, unfair competition, all types of IP cases. And it's a great pleasure to meet you all here and share our experience with you. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes. So I'm a principal in Rouse. I've been working in Asia, mainly in China, for 25 years, managing IP programs, whether that's portfolio management or enforcement, litigation, licensing, commercialization, a little bit of everything. But more recently, focusing on technology and software licensing and litigation.
Hi guys, this is Vic DeMarines. I'm the kind of strategic product manager at Revenera, but have had over 15 years of experience with technologies around compliance intelligence and working with customers to implement their compliance programs using compliance intelligence, which is essentially gathering telemetry on the use of software applications to help our customers monetize overuse and unlicensed use of their software applications. Yeah, so I guess in terms of telemetry, one of the things that we often work with our software customers is, when they start seeing data within their applications and they want to take action and they're starting to build a compliance program or they have existing compliance programs and they want to expand into China, often it's it's not the first place that they start is going doing compliance actions in China and leveraging telemetry data. Can I ask, in terms of today's market and today's environment, should companies that are starting to expand their programs, should they absolutely look at China as an actionable territory?
Yeah, Landy, shall I take that one first? And would love to hear your thoughts too. We've obviously been operating in China, including enforcement from the very beginning, since the early 90s. So we're very comfortable with the IP landscape and enforcement landscape. So yes, of course, we would say. There are certainly challenges, and we're very upfront about what those are. But clearly, there are companies that also get comfortable with that landscape, and we'll talk about that shortly in terms of software companies. But overall, and we have some statistics as well, so it's not just our word for it. You can actually benchmark and see what other companies are doing.
Yeah, and actually in China, as Chris just introduced, we have witnessed great progress and fast changing in the past years, especially the development on technology and digital, etc. And to be very frank, in in the past even 2 to 3 years, we have seen great progress in courts to apply digital evidence into the civil litigations, and we have seen blockchain technology and other like technology related to digital to be introduced into real cases. And so we felt that it's quite obvious there's a trend to apply more and more digital evidence and including telemetry evidence into the judicial system.
And Chris, maybe you can put it into a little bit more context by talking about the personal information protection law and sort of what those implications look like.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of discussion around the sort of whole cybersecurity regime. There's been a sort of steady drip of legislation, but the PIPL is sort of the newest biggie from last year. And like any new law, there's a lot of grey area. So it's very reminiscent to me of the GDPR when that was first coming out, and there was a lot of consternation about that. But now we're all living with it. So if we got into the details, we'd need a whole separate session on that. But our overall view is that in the application of anti-piracy, using telemetry to basically enforce your rights, in similar contexts, generally we think that's there's a lot more permissible approach in government to that. As Landy said, the courts are also very much in favor of using technology. So we'll talk a little bit about what evidence we might bring in enforcement, but being able to use very accurate, phone home data is, I think, something that we very much advocate and would be supported. I think the only risk areas that at least need some compliance sort of due diligence would be around personal emails. So whether those can be masked in, there's different approaches to that. But overall, I would say, companies should be. It's well known in the industry, right, that telemetry is used. It's well known in the industry in China. There are experts who at institutions who can provide courts with an understanding of how it works. So it's not something very secret that should be kept in the closet. We would advocate very much training the courts on using it and being very comfortable with using telemetry as evidence.
So it sounds like that's. I'm sorry, Michael. So that sounds like that's increased over the past few years. The use of this data, and the courts themselves are more educated in how that data is presented. And I think from a customer perspective, at least the ones that I had on the conversation around that the personal information protection law, there's a concern or a risk that would prevent them taking action. But it sounds like if the focus is on monetizing an organization, using that data to present evidence, and the real target is to really talk to that company about getting authentic use of the software and not using the personal aspects of the data that maybe are collected, that's a good focus. That's something that's accepted in the courts.
That's our belief, yeah. Landy, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, because our PIPL law and the data security law is just coming into force, still quite new, and lots of unclear area for the moment. However, the principle introduced by PIPL and the data security law, including 2 points. One is the minimum collection of data related to personal data, and the second is very limited usage of that data for a specific purpose with necessary requirements. So with those 2 points, it also when it comes to enforcement, there would be a debate over the purpose for enforcing a right against piracy. Would that give you a reasonable justification to use the data? And for us, we think there is some way to build up on that. So although it still remains to be clarified, through the practice. However, we think there is some argument there, and we're willing, how to say, alongside process to wait this point to be getting to get clearer. And as Chris mentioned, yes, this may worth another whole session to discuss and look into.
So that's a great place to transition, because I know that Rouse has done a lot of research with Ciela on software copyright litigation in China, and the findings are both interesting and encouraging. So let's start with the win rate for foreign plaintiffs. Your research shows a win rate of 83.5%. Can you talk about that more and share what the elements of a successful case in China looks like?
Yeah, sure. Just to give a quick background on Ciela. This is a database that we run. We've run it for 12 years now, and we basically collect all the published IP decisions. I think we have over 60,000 now. Not a large proportion are not published, but we think we have everything that's published, and we mine that those decisions for insights on, and then to give clients research and strategy on what to expect when they go into court. So we did in 2020 a sort of deep dive on specifically end user piracy litigation. And as you said, Michael, we found that there were really very small number of foreign software companies that were litigating. Only in a 10-year period, 400 or so, compared with about 1,200 domestic companies. So pretty normal in our data set that domestic companies are always litigating more. Foreign companies tend to be much more selective. But when they did litigate, some big names like Microsoft, Siemens, Autodesk, and Dassault, for example, it looks like they have a 100% win rate. And then we found a little surprise. There's a small company called Rhino, which had filed 113 cases in the period we were looking at, and only won 83. So I can just think they were just, filing a lot of throwing out a lot of litigations without much preparation and see what they got. So that brought down the averages a bit. But generally, the larger companies had they were getting consistent wins.
I think you have a slide for that too.
Yes. So I've got a slide here with the sort of top litigators. Yeah, so the questions that companies ask is, firstly, am I going to win? Right? Is there some bias against foreign companies? And throughout our Ciela database, the answer is no. In fact, foreign companies tend to have a higher win rate. There may be some sort of selection bias behind that in terms of, but that's consistent with our own experience as well. And then the next question is, well, what do we get if we win? And historically, compensation, damages awards had been very low. I mean, our data set is 10, over the span of 10 years. So we have the data here on the, mean compensation awarded to foreign companies is still way above what domestic companies get. Again, foreign companies probably, only litigate the largest cases. Domestic companies will have a go, with a smaller case. So the outcome is around, on average, is around sort of $500,000 Chinese yuan, so $80,000. Not very impressive. Having said that, when we look at some of the outside of the averages, some of the top awards, they're pretty huge. So Dassault has in our database by far the largest award given to it, which is 20 million renminbi, 20 million Chinese yuan, which is 3.3 million US, which in our entire Ciela database would be a very high ranking award. And then Dassault also have the number two. We've got some really big awards that are above $1 million US, which again, in in the context of damages awards in China, these are pretty high. Overall, damages are increasing. We're seeing that trend. The laws now have all increased statutory damages, provide for punitive damages. So we're going to see the compensation awards increasing. We're already seeing that trend. One other thing I was going to add here was the report we produced was in 2020. We did a little sort of update to see what else has been happening since then, and a new plaintiff has popped up, which was Synopsys. Synopsys had 5 cases at the Supreme Court. These are appeal cases, and by the way, the cases are not usually not published until the final instance. So Synopsys probably started their litigation and at the lower court, a couple of years ago, and ended up in the Supreme Court, which is not unusual because the Supreme Court is now for technology cases is now for larger technology cases is the Court of Appeal. And they got a win of 8.7 million renminbi. So again, another very, very large award against a company in Wuhan. And then Siemens also had some cases. I would say generally, again, very good news from what those cases show. They show not only high damages, but they show the courts, and especially the Supreme Court, being willing to basically reverse the burden of proof, or take a negative inference against the infringer. So, for example, where there's an evidence preservation order, which we're going to talk about in a minute, if the defendant does not cooperate with the search done by the court, there can be consequences to that. There'll be a negative inference. So if, for example, only 10 machines are found installed with pirate software, but there's 50 engineers in a design in the design room, there might be an inference that there's a larger number of pirate users. So these are positive developments. The only one which was a little surprise is that Siemens had one case on appeal where the damages were actually lowered, so they still won the infringement case, but the court, which was a high court, provincial high court, actually lowered the damages by changing the method of calculation of damages, which probably is an
Hey, Chris or Landy, just in terms of the type of companies that were successful in terms of these actions, are you still seeing? Let me just understand from a state-owned perspective. I think that was, in talking with customers, they would try to not target state-owned sort of organizations. Is that changed? Are these also state-owned companies?
Landy, do you want to give your view on that?
Yeah, very quickly. Actually, we did have some data. Chris, you may remember we looked into cases where state-owned companies are taken as defendants. Actually, from the data, we do not see a obvious bias on that type of case. Actually, in the situation where the state-owned companies are defendant, the court take the case still with the their standard process to look into. So and also within our experience, sometimes state-owned companies as defendant may give you a better chance for a negotiation in settlement, especially settlement negotiation, because in lots of state-owned companies, they don't want to be seen as a defendant in court. And that actually can give you a good leverage.
Thanks, Landy. And we'll be sure to include a link to the report so people can see that. And we'll include your contact information as well in the show notes if you want to reach out, get a copy of the slides so they can get more detail on things. But speaking of EPOs, evidence preservation orders. The report also notes that the evidence of the scale of the infringement is of primary importance, and that plaintiffs who obtain EPOs have the most decisive outcomes. What types of evidence are most persuasive here, and what does the process of obtaining an evidence preservation order look like?
Landy, you,
Okay,
you give
maybe.
us your experience from the front
Okay.
lines.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chris. Yeah. So an evidence preservation order, we call it like EPO. Oh, good, nice. We have a slide here, and you can see a very vivid picture showing what an evidence preservation order would look like. So basically, it's pretty much like a search order conducted by the court in this situation where it is very hard for the plaintiff to get evidence. For example, in enterprise software cases, it's very hard for plaintiff to go into the defendant's venue to check their computer. So basically, the plaintiff can file an application with the court, ask the court to check instead the venue of the defendant and check the computers to see whether any evidence can be collected against the pirate use. So the EPO would usually taken without a advance notice to the defendant, just to make sure they are not alerted beforehand and take any measure to hide the evidence. And this is pretty much used in the situation of enterprise software cases. And to facilitate an EPO in China, because we do not have the evidence discovery or evidence disclosure procedure as what you have in US. So basically, we need to have the plaintiff to show at least some preliminary evidence to the court to present they have a possibly valid case to get an EPO. So that preliminary evidence could include, for example, some job postings of the defendant to show they may have used the software in dispute, or some like telemetry evidence to support the court to grant an EPO, and also to in reality or in practice to support the court to conduct EPO, some advanced undercover investigation might be conducted on the plaintiff side to get as much information as possible of the defendant's premise and understand what may happen during the EPO and to support the court. So I think that is a brief introduction of EPO. So Chris, feel free to comment and add any point from your perspective.
Yeah, I think the main points are from a sort of from a client's expectations point of view. We want to bring as convincing a case as possible. So preparing, as I said, there's no discovery process, so you don't sort of build your case as you go along. You build it really upfront and sort of go in with as much as possible. So building the case can take longer than the case itself. Being very patient and diligent about evidence collection is really key.
Yeah, I can just a comment on. I think it must be pretty critical to identify the location, and I know you kind of mentioned that. Do you see telemetry helping quite a bit in the cases that you've covered? I don't know if that's Landy.
In terms of yes and no. I mean, obviously, telemetry can be very accurate in some respects. Obviously, a lot of the companies that we're looking at as litigation targets, they're not small. So undercover investigations are becoming more challenging. They used to be very commonplace, and we used to work with teams of investigators. And particularly in physical goods, piracy of physical goods, you can actually go in and see stuff being made. That's a different type of project. But with enterprise software of various kinds. It happens behind closed doors. So we tend to advocate using telemetry more rather than relying on hoping that an investigator is going to go in and see stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, the technology is not that new to courts. And in our research of the software cases, actually, in the past year, um, in earlier stage, the court already introduced some like telnet instructions, or it's like a very simple and crude way to create a telnet connection with the terminals the defendant are using it, and get some evidence from that. It's also technology, but in a more simple way, and that has been introduced into the judicial system years before, and so that's show actually the court are they're not how to say they're still quite open. They would be open to using like technology. And now I think using the telemetries and the core home technology we're discussing, it's more like a more advanced technology compared with past. So it's just a process to get the courts more aware of this and more getting used to use such technology, and it's an education process as well. And during that process, we think it's also be helpful to introduce, when necessary, like an expert or appraisal institutes who can understand that technology to help the courts to better understand from a more neutral perspective.
Great. Thanks, Landy. So one last question before we have to wrap up. Chris, I know that when we were getting ready for the podcast, you had mentioned that courts in China don't like lots of procedure and aim for settlements. Are there best practices that you can share that help drive a case to successful settlement in China?
Again, I'll defer to Landy on that and her sort of experience in action.
Thank you very much, Chris. And as you may all know, China is a country where we do not that much like lawsuits, and we like harmony. So actually, courts they always have a KPI to facilitate and how to say to encourage settlements during the court proceeding. So now we actually have a lot of opportunities or time frame time spots for settlement discussion. Before your case is officially filed, we have a phase for pre-case settlement discussion, and after the how to say the evidence exchanged, and before the hearing happens, or even after the hearing occurs, there is always chance to discuss settlement. So, and when the courts, they found there are opportunities for both parties, or both parties are showing some intention for a settlement, the judges would very love to help both sides to reach a settlement. And actually, in copyright cases, especially copyright cases relating to licensing scheme, we see lots of settlement cases and at a high proportion for settlements instead of go through the all proceeding until the end of judgment. Yeah.
Yes, I would say, and again, we can look at the data. I would slightly disagree with you, Landy, on the point that Chinese companies don't like to litigate, because China is the busiest, has the most IP litigation in the world. But
they have lots of companies.
Yes, it's a big country. The courts are extremely busy. They have deadlines to close a docket, certainly at least for domestic cases where the parties are domestic. So they don't like a lot of procedure. So the system as a whole is very amenable to cases where you want to get a settlement. Your aim is just to get some money and get out of there. Where you have a highly complex case that you have to win. We obviously, with some patent cases where you need to set a precedent, the lack of procedure, how you use experts and how you use complex data can be less favorable, or perhaps a little more improvised, if you like. But where you're really, and in a lot of our piracy cases, that's really what it's about. I mean, the price, the compensation amount is going to be, the standard license price in most cases. It's just a matter of, proving that there was piracy and what extent it was. And then obviously past damages is something that can be negotiated. And in most cases, you're looking to convert a customer. So you keep the door open through the process, and make sure that, nobody's losing face, right? So during the litigation, keeping the temperature down and allowing both sides to to feel comfortable about a deal.
That's a great point, Chris. And we've seen that before, heard that before too, where the ultimate goal of these actions and engagements really are to get that current infringer to become a long-term valuable customer to the software publisher.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. And as you pointed out, sometimes you do need to see a case all the way through for precedent, and also to show that the publisher is willing to go all the way, right? And there's some teeth behind those initial outreaches and letters and things like that, and motivate infringers to settle by having that precedent established.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, just to make that on that point, Michael, it's important to understand that appeals are automatic in China. So it's very, very common in the cases we discussed in the Cielo report. Both sides appeal. Because usually the foreign plaintiff, whether it was Siemens in the most recent case, because they weren't happy with the award, right? So they appeal, and then the other side isn't happy with the award because they're claiming that they're not infringing, or the evidence provided of infringement was not sufficient. So again, companies should just be aware of that situation, and whether they're probably going to get a better, they might get a better result the higher up they go, because, as I said, it's generally looking like a relatively plaintiff-friendly outcome so far. But you do have to be prepared to go. And it's still a quick process. These cases are not dragged out for years and years.
Yeah, I was just going to ask a quick question on the 10 months in terms of the prep. And it feels long, but I would say that if a company is expanding into China with their compliance program and they start doing these cases and building that best practice in terms of how to gather evidence and how to present it, do you see that coming down for repeated cases, or is it just the average?
It doesn't get. I don't think it gets really any easier, because that's the amount of time you would build the evidence for a particular case. I mean, yes, the first case is always longer, because often we're educating a client on the system. So you've got less of the internal communication as you get into more cases, but it's really around having the right expectation as to how when you go to the judge, you've painted a really complete picture. And once you pull the trigger, if you have an EPO, then you're gonna get some hopefully very good information from inside the organization. If you don't get an EPO, then you can still bring the case. It doesn't mean you don't have a case. But it's just to be aware that there's just no discovery process, so you have to dig out the evidence yourself.
Okay, so it's pretty important, and I got the telemetry aspect on my mind a little bit. It's pretty important to show consistent use, would you say, in terms of the software? Maybe not for 10 months, but you're painting a picture that there's been significant use or a consistent history of use.
Yeah, I mean, most of the companies that the defendants that we're targeting, they've been they're diehard pirates, right? And they've had warning letters, and
long
they've had,
history,
numerous contacts from license compliance, and they just carry on. So those are the ones that are worth, because you want to make an example of them, right? You're not going to get a result through regular sort of license compliance engagement that's been tried and failed. So generally they're pretty big cases, and they have a long history. So in the context of that, spending several months to prepare your case, it isn't such a big deal if you've spent 3 years chasing them to comply, and then they just keep bowling on and using as much as they want.
Fantastic. Well, Chris and Landy, thank you so much. That was a really interesting discussion. I do think we're going to want to chat again soon and dig in a bit more to some of the topics we've covered. As I mentioned, we will share your contact info and a link to the report in the show notes so people can get in touch with you. So thanks again for being here. And for viewers and listeners, please be sure to like and subscribe to the Revenera podcast so you won't miss any episodes. And please share this episode and our podcast with friends and colleagues that you think would be interested in these topics and more. So on behalf of my colleague, Vic D. Marines, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.